Silver Creek Studios, I'm Jared, and this is another pinch hit episode of the BFIBs Almanac. There's a lot going on right now in spring training. There's so much content out there. We've got articles on STL Today, we got blogs on Viva Albertos, we got podcasts, we got Instagram pictures, so much coming from everywhere, all about the Cardinals, all about spring training. It's a good time to be a BFIB right now. But that being said, there's so much to pour over and go through and kind of decide what to discuss and what to talk about. So I thought I would pick and choose a handful of interesting stories or elements of spring training that I find fascinating. I'm definitely going to reference specific articles and specific writers, and I encourage you to check them out. Go read their content online. Download their audio or their video or whatever. There's so much to check out. It's an exciting time, start of spring training. But before we get into that, I want to invite you to get a hold of the show on Twitter and Instagram at BFIBs Almanac. And you can email us, bfibsalmanac@gmail.com. And you can find us on YouTube, BFIBs Almanac Podcast. So let's dive in. First on my list here is Alex Reyes. I think he's a prospect that everybody's got their eye on. Everybody kind of wants to know how he's going to bounce back from injury. And Derek Gould wrote a story today on stltoday.com that really kind of gets into where Alex Reyes is at with his rehab and, his starting his spring. So for those of you who don't remember, Reyes is a 24-year-old, which is still really young. I feel like he's been around, a long time that we've been talking about him. But he's still only 24. He had elbow surgery in 2017 and shoulder surgery last season in 2018. But he's essentially fully recovered. He's on a normal throwing program, throwing with all the regular pitchers. He's not in a rehab group. Now, that being said, he is about a week behind in his starting his spring. And all that means is he's going to have one or two more bullpen sessions before facing live hitters, while some of the other pitchers will start facing hitters, I think on February 19th is what I read. So he's going to wear number 29, which hopefully you recall, the famous Cardinals pitcher that wore 29, Chris Carpenter. And as of now, the team is not mapping him out as a reliever or a starter. They're going to, let it depend on how he feels, how he responds physically to the stress and the workload. And they're just going to kind of see where that goes. But he could end up in the rotation, starting rotation. He could end up in the bullpen. He could end up in Memphis. We don't know. They don't know. They're not going to force it. But they're definitely leaving open all of those options. So if he performs well and he outperforms somebody in the top 5, then he will be in our starting rotation. If our starting rotation is solid and he's effective in the bullpen and they think that, he maybe can't handle that full workload of 6-7 innings to start, they're going to throw him in the pen and he'll succeed there. So fingers crossed he's going to stay healthy. He's our number 1 prospect on the team. I believe he's in the top 10 prospects in all of baseball. So very excited to see what comes of Alex Reyes. Next up was another article by Derek Gould about Mike Maddux and his view on his pitching staff right now. He currently sees 12 pitchers going up to the club when they come north. He's open to 13, but he'd like to see 12 right now. And we've talked about that number several times in different aspects, but 12's pretty standard. Most teams have a 12-man pitching staff. Occasionally you'll see 13, which is going to, obviously take a guy off the bench, one of your position players. But right now they're going to go with 12. And Maddux currently sees Carlos Martinez, Jack Flaherty, Michael Wacha, Miles Michaelis, and Adam Wainwright as our 5 starters. Now, I would say the biggest question mark out of those would be Wainwright, just because of his health. He was so on and off last season. At one point he couldn't throw harder than like 82. But he ended the season relatively healthy, throwing harder than he had been, and they're excited to see where he goes and what he can do this year. So he might fall back and go into a bullpen role. He might be completely ineffective and have to retire, or he might, lock down one of those top 5 rotation spots. So we'll see. I think, honestly, there's questions at all 5 of those spots. But all 5 of those guys have performed really well for us at different times over the last couple seasons. So I think that's has the potential to be a very solid starting rotation. But we have a lot of depth. We've got, currently, they said they want to stretch out 12 of the 33 pitchers in camp. 12 of them as starters are going to be stretched out for now. So that's including those 5 guys that we just mentioned. You can throw Gomber in that list, Gant, Daniel Ponce de Leon, Ryan Helsley, which is a guy we don't talk about too much. He's a 24-year-old hard thrower. He had a shortened season last year with shoulder fatigue, but he's an effective pitcher. They expect good things out of him. And Dakota Hudson is also in that list, which we did see a little bit of Hudson last year on the big league club at the end of the year. He kind of tailed off at the end. I think he was getting a little worn out, but he was the minor league pitcher of the year for the Memphis Redbirds. And I think they expect good things from him. He's not exactly a fireballer. I mean, he definitely gets up there in the mid-90s, but he's not a swing and miss pitcher. He's not striking out a ton of guys. He pitches to contact, and he does seem to not give up a lot of home runs, doesn't give up a lot of damage, but he needs to kind of refine his pitches a little bit. So I could see him maybe being sent down to Memphis again to work on some things, along with probably Helsley and maybe even Ponce de Leon. I could see Gomber and Gant maybe being in the pen, and obviously, we're going to have depth with our rotation. With all those guys gave us meaningful innings last year and look like effective pitchers. So I think we're set as far as starters. We just don't know who they're going to be yet. I think we know, but we'll see. Mike Maddux did say this is the deepest staff he's ever had, and he referenced some staffs he's been on where he only had 8 quality pitchers, and the rest he called they were handing out scholarships to these guys. So, which is not a good term. Basically, a guy who didn't earn it. They just needed somebody, and they said, "Here you go. We need somebody. Here's a scholarship." But so this is the deepest staff he's ever had, which is very exciting for Cardinal fans. So next up on my list is Carlos Martinez. Now, Benjamin Hockman wrote an article on stltoday.com kind of talking about Carlos and his this new fire that he has this season. Quote, "Right now, it feels like a hunger. I'm going to show you guys," end quote. That's from Carlos Martinez. So he apparently, wants to get back into form. He was on the DL 3 times last year. I think he was almost tardy for one of his starts. I believe he missed the beginning of spring training. It was this kind of big mystery, like what's going on with Carlos? Why isn't he here? He's definitely had an up and down season in 2018. He did end the year as our closer, partly over injury concerns, and our closer at the time was injured on his own, and we had the rotation was looking pretty good, so it really kind of made the most sense to let's ease Carlos back into 1 or 2 innings at a time, and it was good. He was an effective closer for us, but they have made it pretty clear they do not see him as a closer this year, at least to start. They intend on him being one of the starters, and I think that's where he's going to fit in if he's healthy and if he's mentally ready. To me, that's always been the issue with Carlos. He's always been immature. I feel like we've been saying this every year for the last 5 or 6 years, but supposedly he has improved his workouts. He has learned lessons from last year regarding his body and his health and what he could and couldn't get away with as far as being ready to pitch. So we'll see. Maddux specifically said WHIP, walks plus hits per inning pitched. WHIP is the telltale. And I think that applies to Carlos. So in this article, Hockman specified in 2018, Martinez WHIP was 1.35 and the major league average was 1.30. It doesn't sound like a huge swing, but within WHIP, you're not talking about very big swings there, and that 0.35 to 0.30 is actually pretty big difference. In 2017, his WHIP was 1.22, so a point and a half almost lower than it was in 2018. I'm sorry, a tenth of a point and a half. And that was tied for 10th best in the National League. So 1.22 in 2017, tied for 10th best in the National League, to 1.35, which was well above the average in Major League Baseball. So that's a pretty big swing for his walks plus hits, and we expect to see him improve on that this year. And again, as Maddux says, that's the telltale. If you can get that WHIP down, that means everything. Even if you're putting one guy on, basically if you put one guy on an inning, whether that's a walk or a hit, so a 1.0 WHIP, then that guy's probably not scoring and you're going to be fine. So we'll see. I've always kind of doubted Martinez as an ace. I know they've been talking about him the last few seasons as the ace of the staff. I think he does not have the maturity for it. He gets rattled a little too easily, and then he gets all upset and has to work through trouble and damage on the bases. And he's just not a guy you can count on mentally. And baseball is a huge mental sport. And I just don't think, I think if he was going to mature, he would have done it by now. If he was going to improve his mental game, he would have done it by now. So I think he is what he is, which he's very talented, very gifted. I think, he's going to be a second or third starter in the rotation, which is going to, good for 13, 14, 15 wins. Hopefully that would be a great season. But I don't think of him as an 18 to 20 game winner, a guy who's a lockdown stopper, so to speak, like a Chris Carpenter was. But that's okay. You got to have guys like that too. So as long as we aren't counting on him as an ace, which I do fear that they do count on him for that too often. So we'll see. I think somebody else will step up, kind of like Michaelis did last year, and lead the rotation, and we don't have to rely on Martinez. But if he's effective, if he is doing what he's capable of doing, then this rotation should be fine. All right. The last point that I kind of wanted to get into was talking a little bit about the prospects, these minor league guys who are getting called up and at different levels, and the sort of a change that we've seen in the list of top prospects. So on the Viva Alberto's site, John LaRue wrote an article that was very interesting. I encourage you to check it out. It's very stat heavy, very graph heavy. Goes into a lot of detail on the top prospects. It's called Top of Cardinals Farm is Changing. And it talks about 4 of the top 5 in our top 10s. 4 of those top 5 are hitters, position players. That's Nolan Gorman, Andrew Kisner, Elauris Montero, and Dylan Carlson. Kisner, I think everybody recognizes out of that. He is our number 1 catching prospect now that Carson Kelly is gone. And he will probably still start the season in Memphis. I think we're going to have Francisco Pena back as our backup catcher. But barring some unforeseen injury or, drastic drop-off in what Pena can do, Kisner's going to start and get himself seasoned in Memphis, which is good. Nolan Gorman, the top number 1 prospect, is a third baseman. He's an 18-year-old. He's already started his professional career, and he is a home run hitting masher. He's kind of the prototype of what the type of player that we've been drafting recently. These hard hitting, muscular, athletic still, but power slugging hitters, as opposed to a few years ago, we were kind of had this emphasis on the athletic player, What's his name? I forget it now. Is it Delvin Perez? This kind of skinny, quick, sort of Magneuris Sierra, if you remember him. We traded him to Miami, I believe, with Ozuna. But these athletes, these fast guys who can run, who can play stellar defense, but they weren't really hitting the ball that hard. Slap hitters, contact hitters, line drives, which is great. You need that too. But there became this big gulf in our system of power hitters. And we were seeing some of these other teams, like the Cubs, with some of these hitters that they were bringing up being just power hitters and home run hitters. So that's definitely been a change, and I think that's what we're seeing. Now, that being said, the number 2 guy on that list, Andrew Kisner, is not a power hitter. He's definitely a contact on-base percentage guy, but he's a catcher, and he's going to get on base, and that's great. We don't necessarily need him to be a power hitter. It'd be great if he was, and he could turn into that, but he's definitely an on-base guy, which is fine. So 4 of the top 5 are position players. 7 of the top 10 are position players, and that's the most since 2009. So, we think of the Cardinals farm system as being pitcher heavy, right? They know how to find these elite pitching prospects. It seems like they just keep coming and coming and coming. The Jack Flaherty type, the Luke Weaver types, right? Dakota Hudson, Alex Reyes, these guys just keep coming. But there's definitely been a trend over the last 5 or 6 years towards offense. So, like I said, 7 of the top 10 prospects are position players, are hitters. So, they're also getting a little bit younger. So, those top lists, you'll see a graph on that article if you go check it out. But overall, the average isn't younger, but only 2015 and 2016 teams had as many teenagers as this year's list in the last 10 years. So we've got, more 18 and 19-year-olds than we've ever had, even though that overall average of those top prospects is about the same in age, but we do have more teenagers now. And of these young guys, they're more, like I was saying earlier, there's more raw power in these young hitters than the sort of toolsy, athletic, defensive type players. And another big change in these list of top prospects is we're seeing more of them acquired via trade. So of that top 10, 3 of them were through trade, and that was the most in the last 10 years. So I'm not exactly sure what that says other than management, presumably, upper management, the GM of the big league club, Gersh and Mosaic, are identifying players that they want and see value in, and they're making moves to get them. Tyler O'Neill specifically is one of them, though I'm not sure. They kind of listed him in some of these categories, but not in others, because they see him not as a prospect anymore, pretty much as a major league, 4th outfielder. So he was on that list of players that we traded for in this top prospects list, but he wasn't in the list in some of these other categories. Anyway, Genesis Cabrera is the left-handed power pitcher that I believe was described as a left-handed Carlos Martinez. Hopefully that's a good description and not a negative description, but excited to see a left-handed power pitching Carlos Martinez. That would be great. And then Lane Thomas was the other guy that we traded for. So I just think it's interesting that these prospects, and these are anywhere from, low A ball, high A ball, double A, triple A, they're all in that rookie ball. We're talking across the board of prospects. These are not necessarily guys that are triple A ready to come up. Even though they're at the top of our prospects list, they're not all major league ready. But they're all ready, projected to be ready within the next 1, 2, 3 seasons. So that's exciting. Now, you never really project further out than 3 seasons, really. But I think the future is bright with our prospects. We've got a lot of power hitting position players, elite level pitchers, and, I think everything else will fall into place. So that's all I've got for this episode. I just thought it'd be interesting. Like I said, there's so much going on. If you get onto any of these websites or blogs, there's just so many stories right now, so many elements to look at. We didn't even talk about some of the exciting, new guys like Paul Goldschmidt, Andrew Miller, some of the question marks that we have discussed in the past, like Marcelo Zuna and Dexter Fowler, and, who's going to make the 25-man roster. Are we going to see Jairo Munoz or Jed Jerko? All these different things. There's so many questions. There's a lot of guys in camp who nobody knows who they are. So I think that'll be interesting to see who sort of stands out. We didn't mention Adolis Garcia in any of this, but he's kind of a highly touted prospect. So I just sort of picked out some stories that interested me. I hope they interest you. I encourage you to check out some of these articles online. We definitely want to shout out the St. Louis sports media here in town. They work hard. They give us all kinds of content that's fun to read through and look through. Special props to Derek Gould. I noticed he was posting some photos that he was taking down in Jupiter with his iPhone, and these were some incredible photos that he was getting of pitchers specifically in stride and on the mound, and some cool angles with baseballs and stuff. It was really neat. So anyway, all right, well, let me know what you think about spring training, if you've paid attention to any of these stories, or if you want to hear anything specific about a certain player that I can maybe kind of dive into a little bit more. Write into the show on Twitter and Instagram at BFIBs Almanac. You can email bfibsalmanac@gmail.com and find us on YouTube, BFIBs Almanac Podcast. So that's all I got. I want to thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. Until next time, I'm Jared, and this is the BFIBs Almanac.